My name's Donna Smith, and this is my video on the brain regions and functions. The cerebral cortex has left and right sides that are subdivided into 4 lobes: the frontal lobe, the temporal lobe, the parietal lobe, and the occipital lobe. These are each separated by especially prominent folds or fissures. Each lobe has its own set of duties. The frontal lobe, just behind your forehead, are involved in speaking, planning, judging, abstract rational thinking, decision making. The frontal lobes are also important for movement. The temporal lobes, just above your ears, process sound, including speech comprehension. The temporal lobe is involved in processing auditory signals, and it's important in aspects of learning and memory. Remember, each hemisphere controls the opposite side of the body, so the left temporal lobe processes sounds heard through my right ear. The parietal lobe receives and processes your sense of touch and body position. The parietal lobes are important for processing sensory information. They're involved in attention and the representation of the space around us. At the back of the head, the occipital lobes receive information related to sight. The occipital lobe contains the major visual processing area of the brain, like the primary visual cortex. These are the functional mappings of the brain. Much of the brain and gray matter is made up of associated areas that are related to higher mental functions like remembering, thinking, learning, speaking, interpreting, and integrating sensory information. First, we have the prefrontal cortex. It's involved with very complex thoughts like intellect, cognition, memory, recall, personality, judgment, reasoning, and consciousness. Next, we have the premotor cortex. It's involved in very complex thoughts like planning of movement and memory for complex motor patterns. The premotor cortex is active when you simply think about moving your muscles. It sends signals to the motor cortex. The motor cortex is at the rear of your frontal lobes. It controls voluntary movements and sends messages from the brain out to the body. It signals motor commands through the brainstem or the spinal cord to the skeletal muscles for movement. The motor cortex is active when you use your muscles. It often controls the opposite side of your body due to crossover. Behind that, we have the sensory cortex, or the primary sensory cortex. It receives conscious sensory signals from the body such as pain, touch, temperature. We have awareness of sensations once it reaches this level of the brain. And then we have the sensory association area. It is the location for interpretation and analysis of conscious sensory information relayed from the sensory cortex. Here we use sensory memories related to touch, temperature, pain, etc. The visual cortex, here this is a blank spot. This one here, this is the visual cortex. Visual stimuli that reaches the consciousness and then gives interpretation of the vision contains visual memories but not facial recognition. Then we have the Broca's area. That's where the speech motor cortex is. Broca's area controls the muscles associated with speech, allowing you to speak meaningfully and fluently. This is in the left hemisphere for most people. Then we have the Wernicke's area. It's used for language comprehension. This is where we understand written and spoken language. The auditory cortex is where auditory stimulus processes through what you hear at the conscious, like music and sounds. However, speech gets routed to other areas for interpretation. The cerebellum sort of looks like a little brain, thus, the cerebellum got its name. You can find the cerebellum behind or posterior to the brainstem, which we will look at shortly. The cerebellum helps maintain muscle tone, balance, and posture by sending out involuntary signals to your peripheral nervous system. This means that you have no conscious control over these signals. It happens automatically. The cerebellum also helps with fine voluntary coordinated movements, which you do have control over. The two hemispheres of your cerebrum are connected by a structure called the corpus callosum, overseeing your ability to think, speak, and perceive. The left and right hemispheres govern and regulate differing functions, giving us split brain. For instance, language production is controlled largely by the left hemisphere, while certain creative functions are controlled by the right. Deep in the cerebrum is where the limbic system resides. Three of the parts of the brain are called the basal ganglia, hippocampus, and amygdala. The basal ganglia has a group of structures involved with movement. Parkinson's disease is considered a neurodegenerative disease. It involves the degeneration and death of neurons. It is most frequently seen in adults over the age of 50. The most recognizable symptom of Parkinson's initially are movement related and generally involve a tremor that is worse when a person is at rest. They also have slowness of movement, rigidity, postural impairment. Parkinson's patients often experience non-motor symptoms as well, like cognitive impairment or psychiatric symptoms. Parkinson's patients have low levels of the neurotransmitter dopamine in the basal ganglia. These low dopamine levels in the basal ganglia are caused by the death of dopamine neurons in a region of the basal ganglia called the substantia nigra. The hippocampus, when I think of hippocampus, I think of memory storage. It is central to learning and memory, and if it's damaged, a person may lose their ability to retain facts and memories. Alzheimer's is the most common cause of dementia. I don't have that. Alzheimer's disease is thought to have been caused by abnormal deposits of protein in the brain. These proteins damage the nerve cells, causing them to die. The hippocampus is usually one of the first areas of the brain to be affected, since the hippocampus is so vital for memory storage. Victims of Alzheimer's disease often have trouble forming new memories. They can't remember what they did 5 minutes ago and often repeat themselves. We can take care of our hippocampus by eating brain nutritious foods, regular physical exercise, and learning new things, like in the BIO-160 course. The amygdala is named after an almond because of its shape that resembles the nut. This major role involves emotions like fear or joy. The amygdala has a strong relationship with the hippocampus. Chronic stressful emotions like anxiety have a negative effect on the health and longevity of the hippocampus. The brain has three major cavities or vessels: the forebrain, midbrain, and the hindbrain. The forebrain divides into anterior and posterior portions. The posterior area of the forebrain is called the diencephalon. I'll mention just three of the structures that are found in the diencephalon: the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and the epithalamus. The thalamus, what we've learned so far is that it's the relay station for all of our senses except for smell. I think of it like the center that receives products from our blue garbage bins at home. They at the center, they sort out the recyclables, sending plastic to one area and glass to the other area and paper to the paper spot. Thalamus interprets the information and sends it down the line, so the correct sensory area of the brain. The hypothalamus, meaning hypo meaning below, so beneath the thalamus, is shaped like the letter S or a seahorse. It is the master regulator for the endocrine system and for the autonomic nervous system. It has a very big role in fluid balance, temperature regulation, and hunger. It plays a big role when it comes to controlling the pituitary glands and the specific hormones they release. It plays a very important role in controlling the autonomic nervous system, which is our fight or flight or rest and digest. You should also thank your hypothalamus for allowing you to feel pleasure and reward. In fact, rats implanted with electrodes in the reward center of the hypothalamus and then given ways to self-stimulate those areas will essentially reward themselves until they collapse or die. So use with caution. The epithalamus, epi meaning near, so near the thalamus, it contains a vascular structure that produces cerebral spinal fluid. The pineal gland and the olfactory centers also lie within the epithalamus. The pineal gland releases melatonin, which helps us fall asleep, so the epithalamus is helpful for maintaining our circadian rhythm. The brain stem is essential for survival, as it regulates the most basic functions to stay alive. It is also responsible for acting as a relay highway for sensory signals that are going up and down the cerebrum and motor signals heading down and out to the periphery. The brainstem is made up of 3 separate parts, which are the medulla oblongata, most inferiorly, the pons, which is the middle part of the brainstem that appears to be bulging out, and the midbrain, situated at the most superior area of the brainstem. The most superior part of the brainstem is the midbrain, and it is here that the integration of the sensory input happens from the periphery and motory systems, and then output from the cerebrum occurs. The medulla oblongata is sometimes referred to just as the medulla. It is the most inferior area of the brainstem and is immediately superior to the spinal cord. The medulla is responsible for regulating some of life's most basic functions like breathing, dilating and constricting blood vessels, and swallowing. The pons is found immediately superior to the medulla. This part of the brainstem is appropriately derived from the Latin word bridge because it spans the 2 halves of the cerebellum. It is also a big role in regulating the sleep cycle. Thanks for watching.